Hey guys, welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Maggie.
And we interview Asian entrepreneurs around the world to amplify their voices and empower Asians to pursue their dreams and goals.
We believe that each person has a message and a unique story from their entrepreneurial journey that they can share with all of us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Hustle Network podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Sahra Nguyen. She is the founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply, the first ever Vietnamese-American and women-owned importer, supplier, and roaster of green coffee beans from Vietnam. On a mission to transform the coffee industry through diversity, inclusion, and transparency, Nguyen Coffee Supply has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Vice, New York Magazine, New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, and honored with the 2019 StarChefs Rising Star Award. Early January 2020, Imbibe Magazine featured Sahra Nguyen as one of the Imbibe 75 people, places, and directions that will shape the way you drink in 2020. Sahra, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, what a kind introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
Sahra, you're such a badass. You just want to put that out there right now, and you're a badass, okay?
Wow, all right, you guys is just really ending my year strong right now. I need all the positivity I can get right now. Thank
you. So walk us through your journey, Sahra. Like, what was your childhood like? How did it shape who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, it's so maybe to start. So, I was born and raised in Boston, Mass. My parents, like many Vietnamese immigrants and refugees in this country, were part of the movement of folks called boat refugees, which means they escaped Vietnam after the war by boat. And my parents didn't meet until they arrived in the U.S., but they had similar journeys. They both escaped by boat. Took them a few months before they arrived at a refugee camp in Hong Kong. And then they stayed there for a few years before they were sponsored to come to the United States, Boston specifically, where they settled. And that's where I was born and raised. So growing up, I think for a lot of first generation children of immigrants, lots of similar experiences of, like, for me, growing up in an immigrant household, I definitely felt like different at a very, very young age. Like, I felt like my culture, my parents, like limited English skills, our food were all like differentiating factors. And at that time, growing up in the late 80s and 90s, they weren't like cool factors. Like nowadays, it's like super cool to be Asian and super cool to like rep your culture. Mm-hmm. But like in the late 80s and 90s, I never felt really proud to rep my culture. If anything, I felt like it was a source of shame or embarrassment. Mm-hmm. So that definitely just shaped a lot of my, my journey growing up as a Vietnamese-American in Boston. And, there's so many pockets of that time that I could go into if you ask more specifically, but I would say my journey in having pride in my culture really changed in high school when I joined a youth organization called the Coalition for Asian Pacific American Youth. We were a social justice-oriented youth activist organization that worked to organize community. We organized rallies and conferences and public demonstrations. And I also, during that time, I met my mentors who helped me shape my critical consciousness, right? And so that was kind of like my awakening. It was like maybe becoming woke before woke was a word. Like it was conscious back then. But all of that really sparked my entire life's mission. From there, I applied to UCLA as an Asian American Studies major because I was so passionate about learning more about my community, about deepening my connection to the community, and also about community organizing. So then my journey took me to California, where I studied at the University of California, Los Angeles, double majored in Asian American Studies and also World Arts and Cultures. And it just kind of goes on and on and on, but I'll pause right there for any other questions.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, growing up in Boston, how did you feel in terms of like your Asian identity? Were there any instances where you felt like, you didn't belong? For a lot of Asians, especially in America, they often feel that, when they go back to Asia, they don't feel like they belong. But also in America, they also don't feel like
we're like a unique group of Asians now. It's like we're not Asian enough to be Asian in Asia. Mm-hmm. We're also like not American in some ways. So just how you feel about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, I think like within our lifetime, I think for like the millennial generation, right, the folks who grew up late 80s, early 90s, we live in such a unique time because I feel like we experience both ends of the spectrum. So for me, growing up, in late 80s, early 90s, like I struggled with my Asian identity because this was pre-internet, pre-YouTube, pre-Instagram, right? All these platforms that now actually have an increased level of representation. Like if I was a young kid, growing up with the internet, I could find reflections of myself through YouTube, right? But I didn't grow up with the internet. I was like literally the first class to sign onto Facebook, right? The first or second class. And so that's just a marker of like my experience. So I grew up with like traditional television, like no Netflix, like where there was like one show, the same hour every week, and you had to wait for that show to come on. You couldn't just binge watch. So during that time, when we talk about lack of representation today, and lack of diversity, it was even more extreme back then in the 90s, right? So growing up in the 90s, I didn't have any sources of I didn't have role models, right? I didn't see them on TV, definitely didn't see them in the movies, definitely didn't see them in the magazines, and I didn't have the internet. So it was, it was hard growing up as a Vietnamese-American and feeling so different, feeling alienated, growing up in the public school system, feeling like your peers don't understand you, your teachers don't understand you, they don't know how to say your last name. If I opened up my mom's cooking at lunch in the cafeteria, that was also another source of embarrassment. It was really hard, I feel, growing up as a first generation Vietnamese-American in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And so, I think for so much of my childhood, I just felt really invisible, and I felt like people didn't see me and they didn't understand me because there's so much explaining to do. And this was when, again, referencing the 90s, there wasn't this level of collective consciousness that we have today as a culture society, where conversations around fluidity and gender identity and racial consciousness, it's so norm today, but back then it wasn't norm. What was norm back then was all Asians were Chinese, right? That was the social and political context within which I was living in. Everyone thought we were Chinese, the ching chongs were those slurs was just common everywhere, right? There was such a lack of nuanced understanding of racial identity, let alone Asian American identity, let alone Southeast Asian identity, let alone refugee immigrant identity, right? We didn't have those nuanced layers. Race as a concept back then in the 90s was very dichotomous. It was just black and white. And of course, now that we're in 2020, so much has changed. And I'm and as I reflect on where we're at as a culture and society, how we're able to talk about all these nuanced intersections of identity, I feel so proud to be part of this generation that's carving space. But definitely growing up in Boston as a first generation Vietnamese American, it was a very different time and definitely very challenging.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And so, we understand that you were also doing freelance work in New York City as a film writer and a filmmaker and a writer. And so can you talk about, that experience and how you were able to make your way from Boston to New York City?
Yeah. So actually it was more it was Boston and then to LA for undergrad. And then also I worked in LA for several years. And then it was LA to New York City that brought me here. So at that intersection, that was definitely kind of a fork in the road in my life. It was 2012. I was working full time in student affairs, and I just basically had this feeling where I wanted to live my creative career. Because even though I worked in student affairs, I worked in nonprofits. I've always also been an artist. I've always been a creative person. I've been a writer. I came up in spoken word poetry. I love storytelling through the medium of poetry, writing, performance, film, because I was so hungry for more representation, right?
Right.
So in 2012, I just had, kind of a moment in my path where I wanted to pursue my creative career, and I wanted to go full on into my journey as an artist and as a filmmaker and as someone who was amplifying stories of our community. So from there, I decided to quit my job in LA, and I moved to New York City, and that was the last time I had a 9-to-5 job for another company, right? So since I moved to New York City in 2013, I was a full-time freelance creative working in journalism, writing, and also documentary filmmaking. I did that for 6 years. before I started Nguyen Coffee Supply.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And how did you feel during that process? We have a lot of members in AH and obviously trying to make the jump from their 9-to-5 into entrepreneurship full time. And so what were you doing in LA as your career or your 9-to-5? And did you know that, you wanted to make that jump eventually, or were you, kind of feeling it out and were a little bit scared?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So when I was in LA, I was working full time as the director of the Writing Success Program at the University of California, Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So I worked in the World Student Affairs. I basically ran a writing program working with undergrad students, helping them to develop their critical thinking skills and their writing skills through the writing process. And while I was working full time, I actually had multiple side hustles, which I think is really common with our generation, right? I would work full time 9-to-5, but then once I was off the 9-to-5 clock in the evenings and on the weekends, I was dedicating all that time towards building my creative career. So I was doing things like making press kits and, publishing my blog. I was really big into blogging, in the early 2000s. I was touring, I was traveling for gigs, working on chapbooks, working on, poetry books, working on videos. I really treated my side hustle as a second job, really. People have 2 shifts, right? I treated it as my second shift. And I did do that for a few years, knowing, I did do that for a few years with the intention of, I'm going to make that switch eventually, right? And I didn't quite know how or when, but I just knew that I was working towards that moment, because I think for me in my heart, I know that I'm not the type of person that thrives long-term in a structured environment, like a 9-to-5. So, and that's one thing I want to kind of mention too, for people who are thinking about making that leap or switch from their quote unquote 9-to-5 to entrepreneur freelance life. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneur life is not for everyone, right? And I think it takes a certain type of person and DNA to want to do it and to be able to do it, right? And I also want to say there's no right or wrong. I know many people who are built for 9-to-5s, right? They thrive in a structured environment. They thrive in being a part of a company culture or being a part of forwarding a mission, right? And so I just want to clarify that I don't think being your own boss or being an entrepreneur is less or more, better or worse. It's just everyone's DNA is different and people thrive in different environments. And so with that being said, I think being an entrepreneur, it's extremely difficult. And I think the idea of quitting your 9-to-5 and making that leap into being a full-time entrepreneur, it sounds really sexy, but it sounds really sexy and it's very, very difficult and very hard. And I think people need to really be honest with themselves. Do they want to be a full-time entrepreneur, or do they want to have a successful side hustle in business, right? How much is financial security important to you, right? Are you able to have a luxury to not have steady income, right? Do you have family obligations, right? Do you have to support your siblings, right? And I think all these ideas and questions are things that we don't talk about enough, as how you make the jump, right? So with that, I just want to put that out there. But for me, it's I am that type of person. That's in my DNA. And so for me, in making that jump, it was it did require planning. I was planning and preparing for years, mentally and emotionally, to walk the path of an entrepreneur that comes with a lot of insecurity, instability, right? And I was also preparing myself financially. I stacked as much as I could while I had my 9-to-5. To offer myself a cushion to transition, right? Mm-hmm. I think that when people talk about that leap of faith, it sounds very spontaneous and out of nowhere, and maybe a part of it is, but I think it actually comes with a lot of planning and a lot of intention to be able to do it well, right? Do you have a cushion? Do you have savings? What is your runway with your savings, right? How many months are you allowing yourself to be a freelance entrepreneur, to build out your client list, to build out your revenue streams, right? Mm-hmm. I think it comes to a lot of planning, a lot of intention, and that you can't be successful if you don't have a plan and an intention.
Absolutely agree with that statement. Entrepreneurship is sexy right now because everyone's talking about it. Mm-hmm. You see people on Instagram wearing nice suits and airplanes and everything. Whoa. I only have to sacrifice 6 months to 2 years of my life to achieve these goals. You're like, all right, this is such Hollywood stuff, you know, it's not realistic at all.
Yeah.
But like, take a step back to like your Asian American experience. It's like one of the stories that we hear over and over on our podcasts, you know. Your story is one of the reasons why we exist. It's because we keep hearing these stories from our friends, especially in college too. And people feeling like they don't have a place in this world. And the crazy thing is, on top of that, we feel like even though we're Asian, we don't quite fit in with Asians in Asia or Asians in America, which is really unique. You know, we're like our own subcategory with our own mental problems that only we understand each other. Like I talked to my mom about this before too. She's like, what are you talking about? You have all these opportunities in America. What are you complaining? You're like, you just don't get it. You know?
And their excuse is, you understand English, you can speak it, very well. Like, why is it a problem for you?
And every time you bring it up, they always said like, oh, we come to America, we can't speak English, we still made it, and yet you're complaining?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? Yeah, but going back to your entrepreneurial explanation, it's completely accurate. You know, like it takes so many years of preparation, even while you have a job, you know? Because there's no such thing as jumping right into it, because there's a lot of things that you don't know. You know, they could come from a wealthy family. Their dad or parents could be entrepreneurs that groomed them for years. You know, the thing about entrepreneurship is that no one ever does it alone. You need a lot of support from your friends and family, and especially yourself, to get through all the crap you deal with on a daily basis, where you wake up and you're like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, I just had an easy life, going on my nice vacation, but yeah, I still choose this life because it's meant for people like us, you know?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And so, talking a little bit about Nguyen Coffee Supply, how did the inspiration come about, and what made you, want to achieve this goal with your brand?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many motivations and inspirations behind Nguyen Coffee Supply. I would say it really started around 2016, when I was noticing in New York City and really around the country, Vietnamese food and culture was really having its moment, right? Not that it's new to any of us who's lived it, but I guess in mainstream American society, Vietnamese food and culture was kind of having a moment, emerging in the mainstream, where people were exploring things beyond pho and banh mi. They were exploring bun sale and like bun bale and like, the board, way. It's like, ooh, what's that, right? Yeah. And it was just like a marker of where we are in this society. And on a similar wavelength, I noticed that Vietnamese iced coffee as a concept and as an idea was also becoming very trendy. I started seeing it pop up on cafe menus, like non-mom and pop like restaurants, right? Like a specialty coffee shop menu, right? It would be like their regular espresso program, a matcha chai, and a Vietnamese iced coffee. And so that was an indicator and a signal to me, like, oh, there is this growing level of awareness around Café Sera. But then literally every time I try their coffee and I even ask them what's in this coffee, they'd be like, oh, it's our house Ethiopian or it's our house Colombian. We add some condensed milk to it. And that signaled a problem that I wanted to solve, because I was like, this is wrong on so many levels, right? One, it's miseducation to the consumers. You're calling something Vietnamese iced coffee and it's just simply not. Two, it's wrong to the farmers in Ethiopia and the farmers in Colombia who actually produce this coffee bean, and you basically render them invisible because you want to hop on the trend and call something Vietnamese iced coffee, right? Three, it's wrong to Vietnamese farmers and producers who do not get to benefit from this transaction of using a trendy word like Vietnamese iced coffee, right? I feel like it's wrong on so many levels, right? And I think that, sometimes people, maybe they just don't know better, or they don't have this level of insight or thought or consideration. So that's where people like us, like of our generation, we come in to educate, and we come in to say, hey, actually, I appreciate you trying to leverage and share our culture, but if you really want to do it, let's do it the right way, right? Like, let's connect, let's learn, let's build, right? And then as I looked into it, I actually was really interested to learn that in my research, I would look up all of like the craft roasters in the country, all the specialty coffee brands. And there was so much excitement around this concept of like single origin, right? Specialty coffee, direct trade. And there was, in the coffee industry, there was a movement for transparency where we went from like the Maxwells, the Folgers, the Dunkins, to Starbucks, to now like to Blue Bottles and Stumptowns, where everyone wants to talk about who the farmer is and where it's coming from. And I thought that was great. This idea of transparency for the industry was really wonderful. But I noticed that none of those values were actually being applied to Vietnam.
Right.
If anything, the moment the conversation got to Vietnam, they would just dismiss Vietnam as like, oh, actually, no, they're not a part of the specialty community. Oh, no, Vietnamese coffee is cheap. Or Vietnamese coffee is instant coffee. Or Vietnamese coffee is not specialty, right? Mm-hmm. And then my question was like, but why not, right? Because when we think about specialty coffee as an industry, as a culture, we think about how Ethiopia has a huge booming specialty coffee industry now, and Colombia and Brazil. Specialty coffee did not appear out of thin air. It didn't happen on its own, and it definitely didn't happen with just the farmers on the ground. It was a collective investment of people all along the supply chain who wanted to make things better, right? Whether it was a buyer or a producer or a distributor saying, hey, farmer partner, hey, producing partner, if you do X, Y, Z to your crop, if you improve it with these, organic practices, if you use this biofertilizer, if you focus on hand picking it rather than just the machine shaker, you'll get a better harvest and you can sell it for a higher rate. You can make more money, and then we sell it for more money, right? Yeah. That is the global collective investment of specialty coffee as an industry and a culture. However, no one was willing to have that conversation with Vietnam. They immediately dismissed it as they're gross, they're cheap, there's no room for them in specialty coffee, right? And I was like, well, of course there's not gonna be any room for them if we don't invest in this movement, right? Mm-hmm. Then that's really where the idea for Nguyen Coffee Supply came up, because I just felt like there was such an extreme injustice happening on so many levels of representation, of information, of culture, and just of agriculture and just the farming industry in general, where I was like, well, someone needs to step in and change this. Mm-hmm. And so that's where where really the idea and like the motivation for Nguyen Coffee Supply started. Mm-hmm. And I thought, if all these other coffee companies were just going to ignore us and write us off, then we're going to step in and change the conversation. We're actually going to create a channel and a pipeline to start importing specialty coffee into the U.S., roasting it in the U.S. to be a part of the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And since then, the feedback, as you all have seen, has just been so wonderful. Like we're changing perceptions now about Robusta coffee. We're changing perceptions about Vietnamese coffee. We're bringing more culture and diversity to brewing culture in the U.S. because we're elevating the feed and filter. But also, what a lot of people don't see is we're literally changing the landscape of Vietnam, because we're able to help more farmers convert from commercial coffee production to premium specialty coffee production, which leads to economic advancement for their lives, and it also leads to more long-term agricultural sustainability for the land, right? Mm-hmm. So it's been really exciting doing this on top of all of that, in addition to just bringing really bomb-ass Vietnamese coffee beans to the U.S.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you're so cause driven. Yeah. You love it. You're more than a brand. You can see your vision. You can feel your passion right now. Like, okay, I don't know what I want to do today, but I want to drink Vietnamese coffee.
Wow, Brian, thank you. That's so cool to hear.
You definitely feel your passion a lot, and I think your brand represents more than just a company. It represents your personality and what you believe in, and that's so important for companies nowadays too. You can't just exist as a company now. What is your why behind your company? Why do you exist? All these things matter, and I feel like you capture that really well in your branding. And on top of that, you capture it really well with who you are as a person too, because that reflects into your company. So really commend you for that. There's something that I do want to bring up as well. I mean, we want to recognize you for raising $90,000 for undocumented workers. Like, we saw that article, we shared it on our Facebooks. Like, we want to make sure that people recognize what you're doing, and that's amazing, And thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. That's so thoughtful. Thank you, Brian. I always insert. I have to say, I did not raise it alone. I helped raise it. Sometimes headlines get sensational. I had to DM the editor, DM the writer, like, can you please change that caption? Like, come on, like.
You're being too modest here. You're being too modest here.
But yeah, that was really cool. That article came out this week. That was like so cool, and it's crazy because like that was kind of a while ago. You know, actually it wasn't. It felt like so long ago. This year has just been so crazy. It felt like so long ago. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that was really cool. I think at the heart of everything I do at the end of the day, it's just. I just want to like be here for our community, you know, and like you were saying earlier, like we were both saying earlier, like oftentimes we feel like we don't belong,
right?
Feel like there's no place for us. We feel like people don't understand us, and for a fact, we don't have enough people looking out for us in this country, right? Whether it's the government or leadership, we just don't have enough people looking out for us. Whether that's the Asian American community, the Vietnamese-American community, the immigrant community, the marginalized community, underrepresented communities in general. And so I feel so strongly that like we have to look out for us, you know, and that's why I think even like what you're doing with the Asian Hustle Network, like you all just create such a powerful space for us to look out for us. And, you know, the way you cheer everyone community on and just like affirming us, like it's just so beautiful and wonderful and powerful. And, you know, I'm so like honored and happy to be in community with you all because we really are looking out for us and while making space for everyone to be seen and heard and to thrive, you know. So thank you all for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you for all that you do. And I love what you said about, you know, transparency. I think oftentimes, especially in the food business or the beverage business, they just hop onto the latest trend without really, you know, telling people what exactly goes on in the background. But a lot of people now, like consumers, they really want to know the truth, right? And transparency is so important. And you talk about that a lot, and it benefits both the consumer as well as the company. And so I guess my question is like, what can we do as consumers and supporters to like increase, you know, the visibility of Vietnamese producers and help them remove from poverty?
That's a great question. And I would just broaden that question as well to what can we as consumers do to increase transparency and just like ethical practice in general. I think one is continue to align your buying power with your values, right? Like money talks. And the only way like companies, both small and big, are going to change their practices or build in more social responsibility into their company mission is if consumers say it matters to them, right? And I think that consumers can show that with where they place their dollars and also by speaking up and holding brands and companies accountable or asking more questions, right? Even if the consumers asking questions about, hey, where's my seafood from? Hey, where are these coffee beans from? It just says coffee beans on the packaging, but like actually where is it from, right? Or like, hey, where's my meat from? I think this idea of transparency, how it relates to purveyors and producers in all industries, including seafood, including coffee, including, you know, fruits and vegetables. I think consumers getting into, you know, the behavior of always asking where did literally let's trace the supply chain and where did it come from? Because the Vietnamese coffee industry, so Vietnam is the number 2 largest producer of coffee in the world. And many people don't know that because of lack of transparency. Because their coffee beans basically get rendered invisible once it enters other ports, it enters other products, and it's no longer Vietnamese coffee, it's just coffee, right? Which, you know, it just doesn't hurt anybody if it actually said Vietnamese coffee or coffee from Vietnam, right? How does that hurt anybody? If anything, it would have been an opportunity for people all around the world to build this cultural connection and its appreciation for Vietnam as a major contributor to coffee experience around the world. And so I think if consumers in general just started asking, hey, where are these coffee beans from? Or like, what coffee beans do you use? Or like, where's your fish from? I think it would really help to improve conditions all along the supply chain.
Oh, that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's a really valid point too. And that's so important when we hear that. Being Asian Hustle Network, like we hear is like, how are you sourcing your stuff? How are you doing certain things, you know? And we learn a lot more managing the community than we think. Yeah. So I want to switch the focus back to you, Sarah. Like, how do you find a balance between your personal life and your work life? It seems right now it's so merged. And I think mental health right now is such a huge topic that we need to talk more about for the Asian community, at least. Like it's still very taboo. You know, even for us posting mental health events within the community, people will show up to the event, but they will not comment underneath the thread. So you can't tell if they're interested or not. You know, it's so taboo.
Wow.
We want to talk more about that and shed light on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for creating the space, again, you all, to talk about mental health and talk about issues that are taboo, quote unquote taboo in our community. You know, for me, I would say that sometimes I say, like, I feel so grateful that I started this company in my 30s than in my 20s, because in my 20s, I did not have a good work-life balance, right? In my 20s, it's like, I was really like, I kind of fed into that idea of like hustle porn, where I was like, I'm working so hard and I'm hustling all day and all night and I can sleep when I die. Like, that was my mentality in my 20s, right? Cause I thought that validated me as a hustler, when in reality, it's a sick way of thinking about success. And I think it's totally driven by this capitalistic mindset of like, you gotta go by any means necessary, crush everyone and just end up at the top, right? I'm now that I'm in my 30s, and I think this is part of the preparation that I've done as an entrepreneur, like the mental and emotional preparation, right? Of how to be mentally and emotionally sustainable for the long fight and the long haul or the marathon of entrepreneurship, right? Because entrepreneurship is unstable for many reasons. It could be financially unstable, but really we never talk enough about how it could be mentally and emotionally unstable if you don't have the right tools or the right support systems in place to really endure, right, the journey of entrepreneur. So I would say that, going back to the question of mental health, I would say that for me, I have been very committed to building my mental health practices and tools for many, many, many years. And that comes through a process of self-reflection, getting coaching, getting mentors, getting advisors to constantly reflect and unpack and deconstruct and talk, and then build tools and systems for how to process and how to think through and how to just move forward, right, mentally and emotionally. And we're not even talking about tactically yet or strategically yet, right? This is purely mentally, emotionally. And so it is work, and it's like years of practice, and it is still a constant practice. And so for me today, some things that I do to maintain my mental health is, you know, I stay committed to mental health. So that's everything from, you know, I work with 2 different coaches that are kind of like my therapists. You know, I engage mentors and advisors. I start my mornings with stretching, deep breathing, light meditation. I incorporate daily intentions into my work, right, where I'm literally sitting down and writing my intention for the day. I also, you know, as much as I can, I try to write a gratitude list, right, where I'm literally sitting down and writing things I'm grateful for the day. In doing things like making a gratitude list and writing my intentions, it basically sets my mindset into a framework of abundance and gratitude and positivity, rather than scarcity and insecurity and, you know, pain or loss, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So again, small things, very, very small, but it's an intention and a commitment to being mentally healthy and mentally positive.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Sarah, for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's so important, because I feel like half your entrepreneurial battle is with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're like, I can do the work, but mentally, I'm not there today.
Yeah.
You know?
There are many days like that.
Yeah. And entrepreneurship is a very lonely journey in some ways. And I do want to reiterate this too, like no matter where you are with your entrepreneur journey, you're always going to feel stressed. You're always going to feel like you have that imposter syndrome. You're always going to feel a sense of doubt, you know, and it's crazy hearing that from high level achievers like yourself and other people, but take time to find that balance too. You know, it can't just be glorifying hustle, you know.
Right.
We're in a different generation now. Like, you know, back then the generation was like, you know, it's not good to work with your friends and family. You're going to ruin your relationships. It's not good. But nowadays it's like, I can't work with you unless you are my friend or family. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's interesting, like we think about like our parents' generation, their conditions and their context was so different from ours, right? And I like to talk a lot about like the abundance mentality. And I think our parents just simply were dealing with so much scarcity. And it's not that they were like, intentional about having a crabs in the barrel mentality. They were literally operating from scarcity as refugees and immigrants. And I think that was their reality, right? And so, and their reality allowed us to have our reality where we have more abundance and like more resources. I think more room for like collaboration, which is so cool about our generation. And I will say one more thing that I've been practicing a lot for balancing, the personal, the work, and just my mental health in general is I've been practicing a lot of setting boundaries and saying no. And I've been working on this since like my late 20s of like how to say no, how to draw boundaries. And it's still a challenge and it's still an active commitment. But I will say over the last few years, I've gotten better. I'm flexing my boundaries muscle more, right? So I've gotten better at identifying what's a priority, what's not a priority, how to say no without feeling bad and guilty, right? How to set boundaries, right? And I would say I've gotten like much better at setting boundaries, saying no, but it's actually really helped me maintain my mental health because I'm not stretching myself too thin. And I'm not overextending myself, right? Because every time I say no or I set a boundary, I basically carve out more time for myself. Otherwise, in the previous version of myself, when I was younger, I would just say yes all the time, or I would feel bad, I'd feel guilty, say yes, but it actually just ended up like hurting me because I wasn't able to like preserve and replenish myself if I was just constantly like extending.
I'm glad you didn't say. I'm glad you didn't say no to us.
It's obviously a priority, valuable, and obviously, this is the easiest. Don't be silly.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's amazing hearing you say that. Just hearing you talk about, all of these mental health tactics that you use, it shows that you've grown so much as a person, and I love that you're just, exemplifying that exactly. And, all those habits, it's all habits that like successful people have, setting boundaries, making sure that you're making time for mental health, practicing gratitude, all of those things. Yeah.
They're kind of curious too, Sarah, like what does 2021 look like for you? Because this podcast will be released as the first episode of the year. So what does 2021 look like for you? What are your goals?
Oh wow. It's so crazy. I feel like we've all been drowning in 2020.
Yeah.
Like, especially for us right now with like the holidays, I'm just drowning and trying to crawl out and get some space. I haven't thought too much about it, but I will say, we definitely have a lot of big plans in 2021. And really the goal is just to continue growing Nguyen Coffee Supply, continue growing our influence in the industry and in culture, continue growing opportunities abroad and here for us to be leaders in the industry so that we can continue to shape culture and society, and so that we can continue to be in a position of decision-making and influence so that we can be a part of creating the world and the culture that we want, right? Where the younger generation won't have to feel how I felt growing up, which was invisible, unseen, and unrepresented, right? And I think with my mission with Nguyen Coffee Supply, the more we can grow our mission with Nguyen Coffee Supply, the more we get to be a part of creating this world where people feel seen and represented, right? So in a nutshell, in a brief version, that's our goal for 2021, to continue building and continue growing so that we can continue to contribute to creating the world that we want to be a part of.
Wow, love it. Yeah, very amazing goal. And so I feel like, in my opinion, we just see so much authenticity within you and your brand. I'm very curious, like how do you ensure that you and your business and, like make sure that you stay so authentic in what it stands for on a consistent basis?
That's a great question. How do we ensure that we stay so authentic in what we stand for?
I think for a lot of businesses, they feel that, they need to fluctuate or, change their values or change the way they, frame their mission based on what other people think. But, Brian and I, we just see you so authentic and so true to yourself, and just very curious, how you stay so authentic all the time.
Interesting. Oh, thank you so much for that reflection. I'm very happy to hear that. I would say, I think with any business, it all stems from the leadership, right? So if you have a toxic work environment, the leadership is probably toxic themselves, right? If you have a positive work environment, it stems from, so it all stems from the leadership. So the first thing I say is you have to be right with yourself, right? And that means doing the work to know who you are, to know your voice, know your values, know what you stand for, know what you believe in, right? And that is this internal work that I've been doing my entire life, and I stay committed to. That was with, my work, with youth activism, with being an Asian American Studies major, with community organizing, like with being quote unquote woke, right? Which is what everyone understands today. It was this commitment to developing my critical consciousness and, my voice and identity as an Asian American. Knowing who I am has allowed me to remain authentic to this day. And so that's the first thing, right? You need to get right within, you need to know who you are. And then from there, everything else just kind of stems almost naturally, right? But the next step is with the business, I think more tactically I think it's very, very important to get down on paper, like what your mission is, what your values are, what your company culture stands for, and what your ultimate goal and objective is, right? It's in my head, and I think as I'm thinking about growing and like our team's growing, it becomes so important to put it down so that every time someone enters the company, it's there, right? And also for me, as I encounter challenges or dilemmas, if you just go back to your North Star, right, your compass, like your why that's already written down, it just makes it so much easier to make decisions, right? And I think that's how I continue to steer the ship. Just reminding, if I ever get confused, I just go back to our North Star, our mission and our why, and then I make all decisions to basically move us forward towards that goal.
Yeah, that's absolutely powerful. It's super important to have your why in place, because that is North Star organization. At the end of the day, it's the reason why you guys exist. If you ever diverge from that, that you have it written down somewhere. The original intention is, so super important.
Absolutely, yeah. And very curious, from what we understand, we know the inspiration behind Nguyen Coffee Supply. And after that inspiration, you went to Vietnam yourself to go to a relative's farm. And that's how it all started. And, there goes Nguyen Coffee Supply to be, created. And so how would an aspiring entrepreneur with no industry experience like you at that time start a business from the ground up?
I would say you got to start asking questions, right? When you don't have the answers because you don't have industry experience or any type of experience, start asking questions. Whether that's asking Google. Google has been a huge support for me in my entrepreneurial journey, right? Asking questions on Google, asking anyone around you questions, asking your colleagues, asking your peers, asking your friends, asking your networks questions. And I think there's something to be said about not being scared to ask questions, not being scared to look stupid or dumb, or not being scared to look inexperienced. Like, you have to get over any type of ego you have here about not knowing or about being experienced, and ask questions. That's something that I did from day one, and it's something I continue to do, and something that I think could be a first step to helping someone figure it out, right? And I'll break it down even more. It's being very specific. For example, when I was like learning, if I didn't know how to if I didn't know how to roast, I'd ask my friend who worked at a cafe, hey, how do you roast, right? Oh, this is how I roast. Oh, can I shadow you? Like, right? Oh, what's this? What's that? Hey, do you know somebody who teaches a roasting class, right? Oh, okay. It's literally like I like to describe it as working on a puzzle, right? You all you need to do is find that one next piece, then you lay it down. Okay, that question is answered. Lay it down, and then you go look for the next piece, and then you lay it down, right? You don't need to have the whole blueprint, the whole plan laid out, because it's just, unless you have someone who literally is handing you a blueprint. That's the process of building business. You just tackle it one question at a time, one step at a time. to get you just one step closer and one step moving forward. And I think as long as you just kind of break down your master vision, your dream into these really, really small, manageable steps, as long as you're moving forward each time, even if it's like a detour to the side or you go off track, as long as you continue to move forward, that's all that matters, right? Don't worry about time. Don't worry about people around you, how fast or slow they're going. Just stay focused on your course forward. And everyone's journey, everyone's path is going to be unique. And so really, if you just stay focused on taking a step forward each day, each moment, and again, detours are okay, breaks and pauses and pit stops are okay. But as long as you stay committed to moving forward and growing and learning, then I feel like you're headed towards success if you're not already succeeding.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I love that.
Yeah, I really like that mentality too. And I feel like a common trait of successful entrepreneurs is don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, at the end of the day, like I'm not gonna think any poorly of you. You ask me a lot of questions. You know, it's for everyone's benefit because it reaffirms that person's knowledge of their industry and it helps you learn.
Yeah.
And I like your mentality too. Like, you know, just move forward. You know, do a little bit every day to reach your goal. Like, your goal doesn't have to be so gigantic that it scares you every day. You're like, oh no, I'm overwhelmed. You know, break it down to sub steps because any goal can be accomplished to many steps, many days consistently.
Right. Yeah. And Brian, I just want to build off of what you said. I also want to add, like, in the process of asking questions, also just be open. In the process of asking questions, it's very possible that some people will not answer you, right? They either won't answer you or they don't want to answer you. And that's okay too, right? Because we can't control what someone else does, but we can control what we do. So let's say if you ask them a question and they don't reply to you, right? Keep it moving. Ask someone else. Find another way, right? Because I've asked people questions and they don't reply to me, or I've asked questions or they kind of like dodge it, right? Whatever the reason is, it doesn't matter. Whether they're too busy or they don't want to share, like that part doesn't matter. What matters is you keep it moving, right? Because I've experienced that. So I don't want people to think that, oh, if you ask questions, you get all the answers. Like, it's not about that because people are coming from different places. But I think just practicing that muscle of not having an ego about wanting to learn is important. Because, you know, I've asked questions when people like don't get back to me or they don't answer or they dodge it. And like, to be honest, sometimes people ask me questions and I don't answer because I'm either just too busy or I don't think it's the right like fit, whatever, right? Lots of different reasons, but that's not important. What's important is that you're flexing your muscle of asking questions, moving forward, overcoming an obstacle and not letting anything stop in your way.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And we just have to like put our pride away sometimes. You know, I feel like a lot of people have like a wall because they think that they can do everything themselves, but we just
that's the Asian mentality.
Yeah, it is the Asian mentality.
You know, also it's such an Asian mentality, and I feel like my parents also like there's this like saying like "Kamung lam người ta ngại," right? You know, you don't want to burden them. Like, don't ask them, don't burden them, right? That's definitely something that was taught growing up.
Oh yeah. And so for your personal goals, let's say in like the next 5 to 10 years, what would that be personally?
You want to travel the world?
Oh man, so many
goals. So
many goals. But also I feel like 2020 has just like sucked us into like, let's just survive this moment. Personal goals, you know, I always say that my goal is to I always say my goal is to achieve freedom. And that's freedom to travel, freedom to spend money, freedom to give money, freedom to create something, right? I think growing up, you know, in an immigrant household where there was a lot of scarcity, we didn't have a lot of money, we felt restricted. I couldn't buy Oreos. I could never buy Oreos. They're too expensive. We couldn't even buy the Ziploc bags. Too expensive. There's always the photo flat bags, right? Like, there's a lot of like you could not, or even like being a freelancer or just throughout my journey as a working professional, like not having enough money, right? I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And it wasn't just like financial restraint. I didn't have the mental freedom to do stuff, right? I felt stressed. So when I say like my goal is to achieve freedom, it's just like I just want the freedom to live without restraints and to live without limitations and to be able to do and create a world with like an abundance of resources and knowledge and network. I think that's just like the ultimate goal.
Yeah, so I love that too. It's very abundance mindset.
It is.
I don't want any restrictions. You know me, I hate limitations.
Amazing. And so, Sahra, this has been an amazing podcast, just learning about your journey. How can
yourself
and how can our listeners learn more about you online? And do you have any final remarks that you would like to share to the community?
Oh, wow. I think definitely, if you're listening, you can follow our journey by following our Instagram page. It's at Nguyen Coffee Supply. Instagram is our #1 social media platform, so all of our updates and news goes out there. You can also learn more about us on our website, nguyencoffeesupply.com. And do I have any final words? I just wish everyone a happy and healthy year, and I hope that everyone continues to push forward in their dreams, because our world is going to be a better place with more people just bringing their own unique vision and flair and style to things.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for bringing your vision and being true to who you are and being a part of the AHN community.
Yeah, thank you too.
Yeah,
thanks for making the world a better place.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for making the world a better place, and thank you for creating this community. I'm so stoked to be a part of it, and I really look forward to our journey together, both of ours shared, moving forward.
Likewise.
Thank
you so much, Sahra.
Yeah, thank you, Sahra.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to the show.
We would like to get to the top 10 on iTunes, so be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We release an episode every single Wednesday, so stay tuned.
Thank you guys so much.